Picture this. It's the summer of 1988. The Soviet Union still occupies Estonia. The hammer and sickle flag flies over the capital, Tallinn. Red Army soldiers patrol the streets, and the KGB watches carefully for any signs of disobedience or dissent. But at the Song Festival Grounds, something is stirring. Tens of thousands of Estonians have gathered. They're not carrying weapons, they're not marching with fists raised. They've come here to sing. And the night air is alive with candle smoke, anticipation. Families together, children on their parents' shoulders. Old men stand beside teenagers in trendy denim jackets. The official Soviet-approved program is over, but people do not leave, and instead a murmur begins. A single choir strikes up a melody that is definitely not on the list approved by Moscow. The song is Isamaa on Minu, or in English, My Fatherland is My Love. And it begins quietly, almost like a prayer, and then the crowd joins in, thousands upon thousands of voices, and by the time the refrain arrives, the earth itself seems to vibrate with the sound. People weep. Parents hold their children tighter, and everybody knows that this song is not just music. This is defiance. And for decades, the Soviet regime has tried to suppress it, tried to remove it from Estonia's song festivals, to ban its performance, and yet it was there, sung louder than ever. This night, and nights like it, would be remembered as part of the singing revolution, a movement where Estonians resisted occupation not with violence, but with their voice. And over the next 2 years, the song would not stop. On August 23rd, 1989, the Baltic peoples together staged their boldest act yet. Nearly 2 million Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians joined hands to form a human chain stretching across 600 kilometers from Tallinn to Vilnius. And this was the Baltic chain. And at the heart of this act of unity and defiance, the singing continued. Once again, Isamaa on Minu was there. 2 years later, the Soviet Empire fell and Estonia was freed. This is the story of how one poem, written in the 19th century and given new life in the 20th, became the heartbeat of a nation. But to understand why this song had such power, we must go back more than 100 years to the time of the Estonian national awakening and to the young woman whose pen gave the nation its voice. This is Dictators v Democrats, Songs of Freedom, where we dive into the history of liberation music around the world. Before we start, I have a favor to ask of you. If you value this work, and if you want to see this channel grow, then pick one person, just one, who might like it as well. A colleague, a friend, a family member, and share it with them. This project is growing, and I want to see it grow faster. Because remember, we're Democrats and, well, we have friends everywhere. Back in the mid-19th century, Estonia was not an independent country. It was a province of the Russian Empire, ruled by Baltic German elites, with most Estonians working as peasants. Estonian was a language that was spoken at home, but not in government, in schools, or in high society. And yet, beneath this oppression, a cultural awakening was happening. Writers, pastors, and teachers sought to give ordinary Estonians a voice of their own. And at the center of this was Lydia Koidula. Born in 1843, she grew up in a household where literature and ideas flourished. Her father, Johann Vladimir Jansen, was a journalist and one of the leaders of the Estonian national movement. He edited the newspaper Perno Postimees and organized events that celebrated Estonian culture. Lydia inherited his passion but made it her own. She wrote poetry that was simple, lyrical, and deeply patriotic, and she gave Estonians something they never had before. Verses that spoke of their land, their love, their identity. And in 1869, the Estonian national movement organized something bold and something that continued to this day. The first Estonian Song Festival, or Laulupidu, held in Tartu. It was a gathering of choirs from across the land, farmers, students, townsfolk, all singing in Estonian and celebrating their heritage. And for this occasion, Lydia wrote a poem, Mu is Isamaa on Minu. And the title translates, as I said, to My Fatherland is My Love. These verses were straightforward but powerful, a declaration that love of one's homeland was deeper than fear and greater than oppression. And the poem was set to music by Alexander Kunalaid, one of the young composers at the time, and performed at that first song festival. And as the Postimees newspaper later put it, quote, it was a simple but deeply patriotic text, easy to understand, easy to remember, and it entered people's hearts immediately. And this was the beginning of this song's long journey. Let's fast forward nearly 80 years. Estonia is once again at a crossroad, but now the stakes are higher than ever. In the 20th century, Estonia briefly gained independence after the fall of the Russian Empire and the Russian Civil War. In 1918, amid the chaos of World War I and the Russian Revolution, Estonians declared a republic, and they had to fight for it in the War of Independence. But by the 1920s, Estonia was a free nation. But tragically, this freedom did not last. In 1940, the Soviet Union occupied Estonia under the terms of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, their deal with Nazi Germany. And a year later, Nazi Germany invaded. And then in 1944, the Soviets returned. Each occupation brought terror, deportation, censorship, and the crushing of independence. And it was during this time, ironically, that the song found a new life. In 1944, the composer Gustav Enesaks was convalescing in a hospital near Moscow. He found Koidula's poem in an issue of the newspaper Ravahai. Ravahai, how do I say that? Ravahai. And he later wrote about that moment in his book. Quote, after a long hospital stay, which followed the bombing of Yaroslav in 30, I lived on a stipend near Moscow. Occasionally, I visited our representation in Moscow, and there I composed the mixed choir songs Mu'isamaa on Minu. And I found the poems in Ravahai published there on Koidula's 100th birthday. And the journalist Sten Wildebaum, writing in 2019, looked up the newspaper and found it in issue 24. And he wrote, quote, it's somewhat astonishing that the issue of 24th December 1943, a paper otherwise full of propaganda and grim war reports, devoted a full page on the 100th birth anniversary of Koidula to the commemoration, including the beautiful calligraphic writing, Koidula's poem, Mu'isamaa on Minu. And according to Olev Oja, a colleague of Enesaks who was conductor of the Estonian National Male Choir, the piece was almost certainly performed in 1944 by the State Philharmonic Male Choir at the General Song Festival. However, it was then banned from later performances in 1950, 1955, and 1960. But in 1960, the choirs themselves, in an act of defiance, sang it at the close of the festival. And Enesaks conducted the final verse. And from the 1965 Song Festival onwards, the song has been the closing number at all major Estonian song festivals, although it wouldn't be on the program. And speaking in December 1988 during a radio interview, Enesaks said that he could never have imagined the song would grow so much. Quote, at one song festival, it was even the case where it was no longer on the official program, but the stage began to sing it and sang two verses. Then one of the officials came and said, go conduct. And so I conducted the third verse, and after that, it's always been there. Yeah. At one song festival, it was even the case where it was no longer on the official program, but the stage began to sing it and sang two verses. Then one of the officials came and said, go conduct. So I conducted the third verse. And at the 100th anniversary of the Song Festival in 1969, the audience listened to the performance of the song standing as one. Music scholar Tia Jarg recalled that for the tradition to take hold, one person on the singing ground had to stand up and stand out, a brave move in the USSR. And they said, quote, Some say the first person to rise was Lennart Meri, who worked at Tallinn Film. And Lennart Meri later became president of Estonia. So at a moment when Estonians were facing the loss of their republic, the NSX composition became a hymn of survival. It was not the official anthem that had been banned, but it became the unofficial one and carried in choirs and whispered in gatherings and later sung with tears in their eyes. And Anneli Kooke, Estonia's ambassador to Ukraine, reflects on this period. She lived through it in our interview together for Dictators v Democrats, Why We Fight. What role does music and art have to play in defending and struggling for freedom and democracy, in your eyes?
A huge role, actually, because through the songs and art, and you can express your values. And we were also lucky during the Soviet times that our composers and writers, they could write in a way that the Russian, the Soviet Union, who always proofread, they couldn't understand the nuances. And so you can really, still pass on this. And like my father or my mother used to read me some books and saying that this actually, if you think deeper, it means this and that. So it has been really important for Estonia. And also in 1918, and we had also the writers and all this intellectual part of Estonia who were really for the independence, and I think it's in our blood.
Music is wonderful.
And I think it's also, if you are a small country, then you have your own language, and through songs and everything, and you just keep it alive.
So through double meanings, through poetry that passed unnoticed by the censors, Estonians kept their cultural flame alive in books, in poems, and of course, in songs. They spoke truths that the occupiers simply could not silence. And by the 1980s, the Soviet Union was crumbling. Decades of economic stagnation, corruption, and repression had hollowed out their empire. In Estonia, the censorship remained, but the hunger for freedom was growing stronger every year. And the Song Festival Grounds in Tallinn had always been a site of gathering and of defiance through culture, and in 1988, that was defined. That summer, a wave of demonstrations swept across Estonia. At first, they were about environmental issues, protests against phosphoric mining planned by Moscow. But quickly, they grew into something larger, demands for greater autonomy, for cultural rights, and ultimately, for independence. And at the center of these gatherings was music, was this song. Choirs sang songs that had been banned for decades, and ordinary people joined in. And once again, the song that came to symbolize everything was Isamaa on Minu. And for the Soviet authorities, this was terrifying. Here was an occupied nation, singing its defiance openly. But the crowds were too large to disperse. Tens of thousands, sometimes more than 100,000, gathered at the Song Festival Grounds. And when the official program ended, the people wouldn't leave. They demanded more. They demanded the songs of their nation. And from that, they demanded their independence. So on the 23rd of August, 1989, exactly 50 years after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that had doomed Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania to Soviet terror, the Baltic peoples staged their boldest act of defiance yet. It's the Baltic Chain, or the Baltic Way. Nearly 2 million people, Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians, joined hands to form a continuous chain stretching 600 kilometers from Tallinn to Riga to Vilnius. It was a staggering act of unity. Farmers left their fields, students skipped class, families drove for hours to stand together, hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder. And as they stood, they sang folk songs, national anthems, hymns of freedom. And in Estonia, once again, this song rose above the crowd. And for those that were there, it was unforgettable. Ambassador Kooke remembers it here.
Estonians, brave Estonians, started to bring out the Estonian flags. And when we had this song, it wasn't even the festival, but like hundreds of thousands of people gathered, and we sang all these songs despite we still had the Soviet occupation, and I always remember this. My parents went to these festivals, and when we had this Baltic chain, Estonia, I was there. I was 12 years old. I remember I had tears in my eyes.
And for the Soviet authorities, this was dangerous. The Kremlin denounced the Baltic chain as a nationalist provocation. They couldn't stop it. The image of 2 million people holding hands and demanding freedom with song rather than weapons spread across the world. And journalist Heinz Valk famously described this feeling in Estonia at the time.
Ja vaat siis ma konstrueerisingi sellesama lause, ükskord me võidame niikuinii. Ükskord me võidame niikuinii. Kui ma seejärel käisin igal pool Eestis edasi kõnesid pidamas ja vahel jätsin selle ütlemata, siis rahvas hakkas karjuma, Heinz, ütle see lausega.
This doesn't mean the Soviets gave up easily. In 1989 and 1990, as demonstrations continued, the authorities cracked down. Riot police were sent to intimidate crowds. KGB agents monitored the leaders. They even tried to deploy the army. The local Soviet Air Force general, Drozar Dudayev, quietly sympathized with the independence movement and reportedly used his position to shield local activists. It's also reported that he refused to order his soldiers to violently put down the revolution. And years later, he led his own independence movement in a war against Moscow in Chechnya, where he gave his life. So, the violence that Moscow called upon in Estonia had failed. Each time, the people answered not with stones or fists, but with song and defiance. One choir conductor, sources do not recall the name, remembered a moment when the police tried to cut the electricity at the Song Festival Grounds to silence the singing. The microphones went dead, the loudspeakers fell silent, and then, slowly at first, the audience began to sing without any amplification. Tens of thousands of voices, unaccompanied, a cappella, filled the night air, and there was nothing the authorities could do to stop that. This was really the death knell of the Soviet Union, an empire which had claimed millions of lives and forced people into camps and to live out what lives they did have in fear and oppression. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. The final spark was a failed coup d'etat in Moscow in August as hardliners tried to seize power. The Baltic peoples, they saw their chance. On the 20th of August 1991, Estonia declared the restoration of its independence. In Tallinn, the Supreme Council voted to re-establish the Republic of Estonia, ending decades of occupation and terror. And outside, thousands of people gathered in the streets, singing, holding flags that had been banned before, waiting for tanks that never came. When the vote was announced, people wept, embraced, and of course, well, they sang. Among the songs was Isamaa on Minu. And at last, the love of the far land, declared in Lydia Koidula's poem, had become reality. Estonia was once again free. And now the song has taken its place officially alongside the official anthem. At every song festival, it is sung with the audience rising to their feet. It's not the official anthem of Estonia, but it is the people's anthem. So why can one song matter so much? Why could words written in 1869, set to music in 1944, still move a nation in the 1980s and 90s, and some say go a long way to collapsing an empire? Well, the answer lies in its unique power of culture, and especially in small nations. For Estonia, music is not just entertainment, it's identity and survival. It's how they kept the very idea of being Estonian alive. And as Ambassador Kooke put it, music allowed Estonians to speak truths that censors could not understand, to pass meanings from one generation to the next. Through songs, parents could teach children what it meant to be Estonian, even when history books were rewritten and flags forbidden. So in 1869, the song was one of the first things that described Estonian unity. In 1944, it became a hymn of survival. In the 80s, it gave them courage to stand unarmed before an empire that is well known to have killed millions. And they sung their way to freedom. And today, when the song's performed, tens of thousands rise. Tears still flow. And for many, it's not music, it's memory. They remember the Baltic chain. They remember the singing revolution. And it's a promise that their liberty will not be denied again. And it is especially relevant today. 3 Russian jets just flew over Estonia, the 4th such provocation this week, and Russian propaganda is being put out on all social media platforms that describe Estonia as better under the USSR or really a part of Russian territory. And the feeling among the Estonians that I know is that if Russia wins in Ukraine, then Estonia is next. And this is a feeling that's common across the country. This is why Estonians are now digging trenches again. And these people, they just, like the rest of the people of Europe, just want to be left alone. Nobody wants to go into Russia. Nobody wants to take anything Russian. They just don't want to be Russian. The same can be said for the people of Ukraine, of Poland, of Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland. Independence and freedom is all they're asking for. But for the empire, that's too much. This song, though, it still guides them, still holds a nation together and has enormous meaning. And there's no way Lydia Koidula could have known that when she wrote her poem in 1869, it would one day help liberate her people more than a century later and help motivate them to keep that freedom in the face of an imperialist aggressor. But this is the power of song. It can outlive and destroy empires. It can slip past senses and it can give courage to the voiceless. And for Estonia, Isamaa on Minu is not just a song of love for one's country, it is a song of freedom. And in every voice that sings it today, the story continues. So now, listen to Isamaa on Minu as played at Laulupidu 2019.